Sometimes the bravest thing a mother can do is run. Elena burst through the hospital doors in active labor, carrying nothing. Dr. Cara Munroe had delivered thousands of babies, but this woman was different. The terror in her eyes went deeper. Than labor pain. She flinched at every sound, kept checking the door like someone might come for her. Fresh bruises marked her arms, telling a story she hadn't spoken yet. Elena had fled her own home in the dead of night, left her car blocks away, abandoned everything she owned because staying meant death, for her and her child. She arrived, with only the clothes on her back and a desperate hope that someone would help her bring this baby safely into the world. What could drive a woman to such desperate measures? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The fluorescent lights of City General's maternity ward cast everything in that peculiar hospital pallor that made even healthy people look pale. Dr. Cara Munroe had grown accustomed to it over 3 decades of practice, but tonight something felt different. Maybe it was the October rain drumming against the windows, or maybe it was the way that woman, Elena, had stumbled through the emergency entrance like she was fleeing the devil himself. Cara adjusted her reading glasses and studied the intake forms spread across her desk. 30 years of delivering babies had taught her to read between the lines of paperwork, and these forms were practically screaming inconsistencies. No emergency contact listed, no insurance information provided, address given as temporary residence. Even the handwriting seemed shaky, uncertain. She glanced at the clock, 11:47 p.m. on a Friday night. The ward was busier than usual, with 2 other women in various stages of labor, but something about Elena Martinez demanded her full attention. The way she'd gripped Cara's hand during the initial examination, those dark eyes searching her face for something. Trust, maybe. Safety. Cara had seen fear before. Labor brought out primal emotions in women, stripped away pretenses and social masks. But Elena's fear was different. It wasn't the natural anxiety of childbirth. This was the bone-deep terror of someone who'd been hunted. Dr. Munroe! Nurse Patricia Williams appeared in the doorway, her 25 years of experience evident in the gentle way she moved through the ward. Patricia was the kind of nurse who remembered every patient's name, who could calm a screaming newborn with just her voice, who somehow always knew exactly what was needed before anyone asked. "How's our Jane Doe in room 3? That's what I wanted to talk to you about." Patricia stepped inside and closed the door behind her. Her voice dropped to that professional whisper they'd all perfected over the years. "Her contractions are about 6 minutes apart now, but she keeps asking to leave. Says she made a mistake coming here." Cara set down the forms and rubbed her temples. At 52, she'd planned to start winding down her practice, maybe take that European vacation her ex-husband had always promised but never delivered. The divorce papers had been finalized 6 months ago, ending a marriage that had slowly suffocated under the weight of David's expectations and her dedication to her patients. He'd never understood why she couldn't just clock out from caring about people. "Has she said anything about the father?" "That's the thing." Patricia lowered her voice even more. "When James did the security check, standard procedure for unaccompanied patients, he ran her license plate. Car's registered to a David Martinez, prominent businessman, sits on the hospital board's fundraising committee." Cara felt something cold settle in her stomach. She'd met David Martinez at several hospital galas. Charming man, always impeccably dressed, generous with donations, the kind of man who commanded rooms full of people with just his presence. She remembered his wife from those events. Elena, she realized now, always standing slightly behind him, smiling politely but rarely speaking. "Where's the car now?" "That's what's strange. James found it abandoned 3 blocks away, keys still in the ignition, like she didn't want anyone tracking it back to her." The pieces were starting to form a picture Cara didn't like. She'd been a doctor long enough to recognize the signs, even when they were carefully hidden beneath makeup and long sleeves. The way Elena had flinched when she'd moved too quickly during the examination. The practiced way she'd positioned herself near the door, always keeping an escape route visible. "I need to examine her again," Cara said, standing up. "And Patricia, let's keep this conversation between us for now." The walk down the hall to room 3 felt longer than usual. Through the partially open door, Cara could see Elena sitting on the edge of the hospital bed, still wearing her own clothes, a faded cardigan over a stretched t-shirt that had seen better days. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she was staring out the window at the rain-soaked parking lot below. "Elena." Cara knocked gently on the doorframe. "May I come in?" The woman turned, and Cara got her first clear look at Elena's face in proper lighting. Mid-30s probably, with intelligent eyes that held depths of sadness Cara recognized from her own mirror some mornings. But it was Elena's left hand that caught her attention, a wedding ring, twisted backward on her finger, the diamond turned toward her palm as if she was trying to hide it. "I need to go home," Elena said immediately, struggling to stand as another contraction hit. "This was a mistake. Let's talk about that." Cara moved slowly into the room, keeping her movements calm and predictable. "First, let me check on you and the baby. That's what I'm here for." Elena's hand moved protectively over her swollen belly. "The baby's fine. I shouldn't have come here. Elena, I've been delivering babies for 30 years. Trust me when I say that a woman doesn't drive herself to a hospital in active labor unless she absolutely has to." Cara settled into the chair beside the bed. "Why don't you tell me what's really going on?" For a moment, Elena's carefully constructed walls seemed to waver. Her hand went to her throat, fingers tracing what looked like faded bruises just above her collarbone. Then she seemed to catch herself, straightening up and forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Everything's fine. My husband just doesn't know I'm here yet. He's probably worried sick." The practiced nature of the lie made Cara's heart ache. She'd heard similar words from other women over the years, the automatic deflection, the protection of someone who didn't deserve it, the fear disguised as concern for others. "Where do you work, Elena?" The question seemed to surprise her. I used to teach elementary school, but I haven't worked in a few years." "What grade?" For the first time, Elena's smile became genuine. "3rd grade. They're at that perfect age where they still believe in magic, but they're starting to understand how the world really works." That must have been rewarding. It was. Elena's voice carried a wistfulness that spoke of dreams deferred. "I loved those kids. Some of them came from difficult situations, you know. Sometimes school was the safest place they had." The irony of her words hung in the air between them. Cara wondered if Elena realized what she'd just revealed, that she understood what it meant to need a safe place, to recognize the signs of a child in trouble. Another contraction hit, stronger this time, and Elena gripped the bedrail until her knuckles went white. When it passed, she was breathing hard, and Cara could see the fear creeping back into her eyes. "Elena, I need to ask you something, and I want you to know that anything you tell me stays between us, unless you give me permission otherwise." Cara kept her voice gentle but direct. "Are you safe at home?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Elena's mouth opened as if to give another automatic denial, but something in Cara's eyes, maybe recognition, maybe simple human compassion, stopped her. Elena's voice cracked. "I don't know how to answer that anymore." It was the first honest thing she'd said since arriving, and Cara felt something ease in her chest. This was the opening she'd been waiting for, the moment when a patient finally trusted enough to tell the truth. "That's okay," Cara said softly. "We don't have to figure everything out right now, but I want you to know that you're safe here. Whatever brought you to my hospital tonight, whatever you're running from, you're safe now." Elena looked at her for a long moment, searching her face for something. Whatever she found there seemed to satisfy her because she nodded slowly, tears finally starting to spill down her cheeks. "I don't have anywhere else to go," she whispered. Outside, the rain continued its steady percussion against the windows, washing away the remnants of whatever life Elena had left behind when she'd made the choice to run. In the gentle lighting of the hospital room, with contractions now coming every 5 minutes, she was no longer the composed wife of a prominent businessman. She was just a woman about to become a mother, scared and alone, but finally, perhaps, ready to trust someone with the truth. Cara reached over and squeezed Elena's hand gently. "Then we'll figure it out together. One step at a time." For the first time since she'd arrived, Elena seemed to breathe a little easier. The wedding ring on her finger caught the light as she shifted position, still turned backward, still hiding its meaning. But in the quiet safety of room 3, surrounded by the steady beep of monitors and the distant sounds of new life being born throughout the ward, Elena Martinez was finally ready to stop running and start trusting. The baby kicked strongly, as if responding to her mother's newfound resolve, and Elena placed both hands on her belly with something that might have been hope beginning to bloom in her eyes. The moment Elena's water broke, everything changed. It happened during what should have been a routine examination. Warm fluid suddenly soaking through the hospital gown and pooling on the examination table. Elena's eyes went wide with panic. Not at the medical development, but at what it meant. There was no going back now. "Well," Dr. Munroe said calmly, reaching for clean towels, "looks like your baby has made the decision for you. You're staying." "No, no, no." Elena tried to sit up, her voice rising with each word. "I can't. He'll find me here. I have to leave. Elena, listen to me." Cara's voice was firm but gentle, the tone she'd perfected over decades of talking women through crisis moments. "Your baby is coming tonight, probably within the next few hours. Leaving now isn't an option." The weight of those words settled over Elena like a physical force. She'd been living on borrowed time since she'd slipped out of her house at 2 a.m., and now that time had run out. The baby was coming, ready or not, safe or not. Patricia appeared in the doorway with fresh linens, and that intuitive timing that made her invaluable. "Everything okay in here? We need to prep for delivery," Cara said, her eyes never leaving Elena's face. "And I think we need to have a serious conversation." As Patricia efficiently changed the bedding and helped Elena into a clean gown, Cara studied the woman before her. In the harsh hospital lighting, the bruises were more visible now, finger marks on her upper arms, a faded handprint on her shoulder that spoke of being grabbed and shaken. But it was Elena's eyes that told the real story, darting constantly to the door, calculating escape routes, even as her body prepared to bring new life into the world. "Elena," Cara said once Patricia had finished, "I need you to tell me what happened. Not for gossip, not to judge you, but because I need to know what we're dealing with here." Elena was quiet for so long that Cara wondered if she'd retreated, back behind her walls. Then, so softly it was barely audible, she said, "He pushed me." The words hung in the air like an admission of guilt, though Elena was the victim. Cara had heard this tone before. The way women blamed themselves for their partner's violence, as if they'd somehow provoked it. "When?" "Yesterday morning. We were arguing about," Elena's voice caught, "about the baby. He didn't want children, said they were too expensive, too much trouble, that I was being selfish for wanting to keep it." Cara felt her jaw clench. She'd met David Martinez at hospital fundraisers, watched him charm donors and board members with his smooth talk about investing in our community's future. The hypocrisy made her stomach turn. "He pushed you, and then what happened?" "I felt the baby move wrong, like a sudden shift inside me. I got scared that something might be hurt." Elena's hands moved protectively over her belly. "I waited until he fell asleep, then I took my car keys and just left." "Where did you go?" "I drove around for hours. I didn't know where to go. I couldn't go to my sister. He knows where she lives. I couldn't go to friends because they all know him too. Everyone thinks he's this wonderful man who provides for his wife." Elena's laugh was bitter. He controls everything. The bank accounts, the credit cards, even my cell phone is on his plan. The picture was becoming clearer, and it was uglier than Cara had hoped. Financial abuse, social isolation, physical violence, the classic pattern she'd learned to recognize in medical school, but hoped she'd never see in her own practice. "Elena, did you abandon your car near here?" She nodded. 3 blocks away. I was afraid he might have put some kind of tracker on it. He's always been paranoid about where I go, who I talk to." Patricia knocked gently on the door. "Dr. Munroe? There's someone here asking about Elena Martinez." Elena's face went white. No, he can't be here. How did he find me? Who's asking?" Cara kept her voice steady, though her heart was racing. "Man says he's her husband, very upset, demanding to see her immediately." Elena grabbed Cara's arm with surprising strength. "Please don't let him in here. You don't understand. He'll make me leave. He'll say I'm having a breakdown, that I'm not thinking clearly. He's done it before." "Before? Last year I tried to talk to my doctor about some bruises. David came with me to the appointment, said I was clumsy, accident-prone. Then he had a private conversation with the doctor about my mental state, how I'd been acting erratically since getting pregnant." Elena's voice was shaking now. "The doctor prescribed antidepressants and told me I should listen to my husband's concerns about my behavior." Cara felt a cold fury settle in her chest. She'd seen this manipulation tactic before, abusers who used the medical system itself as another tool of control, convincing doctors that their victims were mentally unstable. "Elena, I want you to listen to me very carefully. I am your doctor right now, and medical privacy laws mean I don't have to let anyone see you without your permission, not even your husband. But he'll say, I don't care what he says. You're my patient, and my job is to keep you and your baby safe." Cara turned to Patricia. "Tell Mr. Martinez that his wife is receiving medical care and cannot have visitors at this time. If he becomes aggressive or refuses to leave, call security." Patricia nodded and disappeared back down the hallway. Through the partially open door, they could hear David's voice in the distance. Smooth, persuasive, the tone of a man used to getting his way. "He's telling them I'm mentally ill," Elena said, her breathing becoming rapid and shallow. "He'll have papers, documentation. He always has documentation." "Elena, look at me." Cara took her hands, feeling how cold they were despite the warm room. "I've been doing this for 30 years. I know the difference between a woman having a mental health crisis and a woman running for her life." Another contraction hit, stronger than the previous ones, and Elena doubled over with a cry that was part pain, part anguish. When it passed, she looked up at Cara with tears streaming down her face. "I should have left years ago. I kept thinking it would get better, that maybe if I just tried harder to be the wife he wanted." "Stop." Cara's voice was gentle but firm. "This is not your fault. None of it. Not the abuse, not having to run, not being scared. You did the brave thing tonight. You protected yourself and your baby. But what if—" Elena's voice broke. "What if he's right? What if I am crazy? What if running away just proves that I can't handle being a mother?" "Let me tell you something about being a mother," Cara said, settling into the chair beside Elena's bed. 20 years ago, I was married to a man who never hit me, but he controlled every aspect of my life. What I wore, who I talked to, when I worked. I convinced myself it wasn't abuse because he never left bruises." Elena's eyes widened. "What happened?" "I was pregnant once. Lost the baby at 12 weeks. A miscarriage that had nothing to do with anything I did or didn't do. But he blamed me. Said if I'd been more careful, less selfish about my work, maybe I could have carried to term." Cara's voice grew quiet. "I believed him for years. It took me 2 decades to realize that leaving him was the sanest thing I ever did." "You left?" 6 months ago. At 52, I finally found the courage to walk away from a marriage that was slowly killing who I was." Cara squeezed Elena's hands. "So when I tell you that running tonight was brave, I know what I'm talking about." Elena stared at her for a long moment, something shifting in her expression. The fear was still there, but underneath it, Cara could see the first glimmers of something else. Determination, maybe, or hope. "What do I do now?" Elena whispered. "Now we deliver your baby safely, and then we figure out the rest, one step at a time." Cara stood up and adjusted the monitor showing the baby's heartbeat, strong and steady, despite everything. "But first, I need to make a phone call." "To who?" "Someone who can help make sure you and your baby stay safe." Elena nodded slowly, her hand moving to the abandoned car keys on the bedside table, keys that represented the old life she'd driven away from in the middle of the night. Tomorrow, those keys would be evidence. Tonight, they were simply a symbol of the courage it had taken to finally run. The woman who walked into room 3 20 minutes later moved with the quiet confidence of someone who'd spent years navigating crisis situations. Sarah Chen, the hospital's social worker, was younger than Cara had expected, probably mid-30s. But her eyes held the kind of wisdom that came from seeing too much too early. "Elena?" Sarah settled into the chair beside the bed with practiced ease. "Dr. Munroe asked me to come speak with you. I want you to know first that everything we discuss is confidential unless you give me permission to share it." Elena's contractions had been steadily intensifying, now coming every 4 minutes with a regularity that spoke of a baby who was ready to make an appearance. Between the pain and the fear of David's presence somewhere in the hospital, she looked exhausted. "Is he still here?" Elena asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Your husband left about 10 minutes ago," Sarah said gently. "Security escorted him out when he became demanding about seeing you. He's been told that no visitors are allowed due to medical complications." Elena's relief was visible, her shoulders sagging as some of the tension left her body. "He'll be back. He always comes back." "That's one of the things we need to talk about." Sarah pulled out a leather portfolio, but kept it closed for now. "Dr. Munroe shared some of what you've told her about your situation at home. I want you to know that there are legal protections available to you, options you might not know about." "Like what?" Elena's cynicism was evident. "A restraining order? David knows half the judges in this city. He's donated money to their campaigns. I understand your concerns about his connections, and honestly, they're valid. Men with social standing often do have advantages in the legal system." Sarah's directness seemed to surprise Elena. "But there are federal protections too, programs specifically designed for situations like yours." Dr. Munroe reappeared in a doorway, having finished updating her medical notes, documentation that would become crucial if this case ever went to court. She'd been careful to record every visible injury, every inconsistency in Elena's story, every sign of the systematic abuse that had driven a pregnant woman to flee her own home. "How are we doing in here?" Cara asked, checking the monitors that showed both Elena's vital signs and the baby's heartbeat. "Sarah's telling me about legal options," Elena said, then winced as another contraction built. When it passed, she continued, "But I don't understand how any of that helps. David's never been arrested, never even been accused of anything publicly. Who's going to believe me over him?" "That's actually something we need to discuss," Sarah said, opening her portfolio now. "Elena, when Dr. Munroe called me, I did some preliminary research. Your husband's name has come across my desk before." Elena's eyes sharpened with interest and fear. "What do you mean?" "I can't give you details because of confidentiality laws, but I can tell you that domestic violence advocates in this city are familiar with David Martinez. You're not the first woman to seek help because of his behavior." The words hit Elena like a physical blow. She'd spent years believing she was alone, that her situation was unique, that somehow she was the problem. The possibility that there had been others, that David had a pattern of abuse, was both validating and horrifying. "Other women came forward?" "I can't say more than that right now," Sarah said carefully. But what I can tell you is that your testimony, combined with medical documentation of your injuries, could be very significant. Elena looked down at her arms, at the finger-shaped bruises that were now clearly visible in the hospital lighting. She'd gotten so good at hiding them over the years, with makeup, with long sleeves, with carefully chosen angles when photos were taken at social events. "He's so careful," she said quietly. "He never hits my face, never anywhere that would show in normal clothes. And he always has explanations. I'm clumsy, I bruise easily, I fell down the stairs." "Classic pattern," Dr. Munroe said, sitting down on the small stool beside Elena's bed. "Abusers who are intelligent and socially connected often are very strategic about how they inflict harm." "How do you know so much about this?" Elena asked. Cara exchanged a glance with Sarah. "Because we've both seen it before, more times than we'd like to count." Elena was quiet for several minutes, her hand moving in slow circles over her belly as she processed this information. The baby responded to her touch with gentle movements, as if offering comfort to its mother. "What would happen if I testified against him?" Elena finally asked. "That would depend on several factors," Sarah said. "The strength of the evidence, whether other witnesses come forward, how good his legal representation is. But Elena, even if a criminal case doesn't result in conviction, there are civil protections we can put in place immediately." "Like what?" "Emergency protective orders, safe housing, financial assistance. There are organizations specifically designed to help women in your situation rebuild their lives independently." Elena's laugh was bitter. "Independently? I haven't made a decision for myself in 5 years. I don't even remember how." "It comes back faster than you think," Dr. Munroe said softly. "I promise you that." Another contraction hit, this one strong, enough to make Elena grip the bed rails and breathe through gritted teeth. When it passed, she looked up at both women with something new in her expression. Not quite hope yet, but perhaps the absence of complete despair. "If I do this, if I actually go through with pressing charges and getting a restraining order, what happens to the baby?" "What do you mean?" Sarah asked. "David will fight for custody. He'll say I'm an unfit mother because I abandoned my home, because I have mental health issues, because I'm financially dependent on him." Elena's voice was getting stronger, more focused. "He'll use everything against me." "Elena," Sarah leaned forward, "courts are much more educated about domestic violence than they used to be. Leaving an abusive situation is considered protective. Parenting, not abandonment, and we'll make sure you have legal representation who specializes in these cases." "What about money? How do I pay for lawyers and housing and—" Elena gestured helplessly at her situation. "There are funds available for exactly this purpose. Emergency assistance, transitional housing, legal aid. You won't be doing this alone." For the first time since arriving at the hospital, Elena seemed to consider the possibility that escape might actually be possible. Not just running away in the middle of the night, but actually building a safe life for herself and her child. "I used to have a life," she said suddenly. "I had a career, friends, my own bank account. I made decisions and solved problems every day." She looked up at Dr. Munroe and Sarah. "I was a good teacher. My students trusted me to protect them." "You're still that person," Dr. Munroe said firmly. "Being abused doesn't change who you fundamentally are. It just buries that person under layers of fear and control." Elena nodded slowly, her hand moving to touch the wedding ring she still wore turned backward on her finger. Soon, she thought, she might be ready to take it off entirely. The phone at the nurse's station had been ringing steadily for the past hour, each call logged meticulously by the night supervisor. David Martinez was methodical in his search, calling every hospital in a 30-mile radius, his voice growing more strained with each conversation. "City General Hospital, how may I direct your call?" "This is David Martinez. I'm looking for my wife, Elena. She's pregnant and may have been admitted tonight." The receptionist, briefed by Dr. Munroe about the situation, followed protocol perfectly. "I'm sorry, sir, but I cannot confirm or deny the presence of any patient without proper identification and authorization. I am her husband. I have every right to know if my wife is in your hospital. Sir, under HIPAA regulations, I cannot provide patient information over the phone. If you'd like to visit during normal visiting hours with proper identification, the line went dead. In the nurse's break room, Patricia shook her head as she updated the call log. 23 calls in the past hour to various departments and extensions, each one growing more agitated than the last. Meanwhile, in room 3, Elena was experiencing more than just physical labor. As her contractions intensified, memories she'd buried for years began surfacing with startling clarity. I remember the first time he made me quit something I loved, she said, during a brief respite between contractions. Sarah had stayed, partly for emotional support, and partly to continue gathering information that might be crucial later. It was a book club I joined at the library, just a group of women who met once a month to discuss novels. Dr. Munroe adjusted Eleanor's IV while listening. She'd learned that sometimes the most important healing happened when patients could finally voice their experiences to someone who believed them. What happened? He said the women were a bad influence, that they were filling my head with feminist ideas that were undermining our marriage. Elena's voice grew stronger as she spoke, as if reclaiming her own narrative gave her power. I thought he was being ridiculous, so I kept going. Then one evening I came home from book club to find he'd thrown away all my books. Said if I couldn't prioritize my marriage over my hobbies, maybe I didn't deserve either. How long ago was this? Sarah asked, making notes that Elena couldn't see but that were being carefully documented. 3 years ago. That's when I really started disappearing, I think, piece by piece. Elena shifted position as another contraction began building. He never said I couldn't work, but he made it impossible, scheduling important social events during my school hours, insisting I accompany him to business dinners on school nights, making me feel guilty for caring more about other people's children than my own husband. So you resigned from teaching. I took a leave of absence that somehow became permanent. He convinced me it was temporary, just until he could establish his new business properly. Said he needed me to be available for entertaining clients, supporting his career. Elena gripped the bedrail as the contraction peaked. I haven't been in a classroom for 2 years. Dr. Munroe caught Sarah's eye. They both recognized the pattern. The systematic isolation, the gradual erosion of identity and independence that made victims feel trapped and helpless. Elena, Sarah said gently, what you're describing is psychological abuse. Even without physical violence, what David did to you is considered domestic abuse under the law. But nobody got hurt. I mean, really hurt. You got hurt, Dr. Munroe said firmly. Look at yourself right now. You're an intelligent, educated woman giving birth alone in a hospital because you were so afraid of your husband that you fled your own home with nothing but car keys. That's not normal. That's the result of years of systematic psychological torture. Elena was quiet for a long moment, processing these words. The clinical terminology somehow made her experience feel more real, more valid. There's something else, she said suddenly. I tried to call my sister Maria 2 months ago. We used to be close, but David always found reasons why I couldn't visit her, or why she couldn't visit us. Too expensive, too inconvenient she was. A bad influence, always something. What happened when you called her? David had cancelled our landline without telling me, and he monitored my cell phone usage. When Maria's number showed up on the bill, he accused me of planning to leave him, of conspiring with my family against our marriage. Eleanor's voice dropped to almost a whisper. He made me call her back while he listened and tell her that I didn't want contact with her anymore, that focusing on my marriage meant cutting ties with family members who didn't support my choices. Sarah felt her jaw clench. She'd seen this isolation tactic before, but it never got easier to hear about. Have you had any contact with Maria since then? No. I don't even know if she believes I meant those things I said, or if she knows David forced me to say them. Elena began crying quietly. She's going to have a baby too, her first. We should be going through this together, sharing stories, planning play dates for our kids. Elena, Sarah said carefully, would you like me to try to contact Maria? I can explain the situation, let her know you're safe. Elena's eyes widened. You could do that? With your permission, yes. And I think you might be surprised by her reaction. Families usually know when something isn't right, even if they don't know what to do about it. For the first time since arriving at the hospital, Elena smiled genuinely. She always said David was too controlling. I used to defend him, say she didn't understand our relationship. It's normal to defend someone you love, even when they're hurting you, Dr. Munroe said. That's what makes emotional abuse so insidious. It makes you doubt your own perceptions, makes you feel like you're being unreasonable for wanting basic respect and autonomy. Another contraction hit, stronger than the previous ones, and Elena had to concentrate on breathing through it. When it passed, she looked up at both women with a new determination in her eyes. I want you to call Maria, she said to Sarah. Tell her I'm sorry for what I said, and that if she's willing, I'd like her to know she's going to have a niece or nephew very soon. Sarah smiled and made a note. I'll call her first thing in the morning, and I want to file a police report. Elena continued, her voice growing stronger. I want David's behavior documented officially. I don't know if anything will come of it, but I want it on record. Dr. Munroe felt a surge of pride and relief. She'd seen too many women trapped in the cycle of abuse, unable to break free even when help was offered. Elena's decision to fight back, to reclaim her voice and her choices, was the first step toward healing that went far deeper than physical recovery. We'll make sure you have everything you need, Sarah assured her. Legal support, safe housing, help reconnecting with your family. You're not alone in this anymore. Elena nodded, her hand moving to her belly where her daughter was preparing to enter a world that would be very different from the one Elena had known for the past 5 years. Whatever challenges lay ahead, this baby would grow up knowing that her mother had found the courage to choose safety over comfort, truth over lies, freedom over familiarity. The phone at the nurse's station rang again, but this time Elena didn't flinch. She was too busy planning for a future she was finally ready to claim. At 3:47 a.m., Sarah Chen stepped out of Elena's room with her cell phone in hand and a carefully written phone number on a piece of paper. Finding Maria Santos had been easier than expected. Elena's sister lived in Portland, worked as a nurse at a pediatric clinic, and according to the internet search Sarah had conducted, was indeed expecting her first child. The phone rang 3 times before a sleepy voice answered. Hello, Maria Santos. This is Sarah Chen. I'm a social worker at City General Hospital. I'm calling about your sister, Elena Martinez. The line went silent for several seconds. Is she okay? What happened? She's safe, Sarah said immediately, knowing that would be Maria's first concern. She's in labor, actually. She's going to have her baby tonight. In labor? Maria's voice sharpened with alertness. Where's David? Why didn't he call me? That's actually why I'm calling. Elena asked me to contact you. Maria, are you somewhere you can talk privately? Yes. Hold on. Sarah could hear movement, a door closing, footsteps. Okay, I'm alone. What's going on? Elena told me months ago that she didn't want contact with our family anymore. She said I was interfering in her marriage. Maria, Elena was forced to make that call while David was listening. She didn't mean any of those things. The silence on the other end stretched so long that Sarah wondered if the call had been dropped. Then she heard something that sounded like crying. I knew it, Maria whispered. I knew something was wrong. Elena would never cut me out of her life voluntarily. We were best friends growing up. I've been trying to figure out how to reach her for months. She needs your support now, Maria. She's left David, but it's complicated. She's scared and alone, and she's about to become a mother with no family support. I can be there in 8 hours, Maria said immediately. Less if I drive straight. Through what hospital? City General, but Maria, there are some things you should know before you come. Sarah spent the next 20 minutes explaining Elena's situation, keeping the details general, but making sure Maria understood the gravity of what her sister had been experiencing. By the end of the conversation, Maria was crying openly. "I should have known," she kept repeating. "I should have pushed harder when she stopped calling, stopped visiting. I let that bastard isolate her from everyone who loved her." "You couldn't have known the extent of it," Sarah assured her. "Abusers are very good at maintaining public facades while controlling their victims privately. Is she safe now? From him, I mean. For now, yes. But David has been trying to locate her. He's called every hospital in the area multiple times. Tonight, he doesn't know she's there. Not yet. But Maria, I need you to understand, when you come here, you cannot contact David or anyone in his social circle. Elena's safety depends on keeping her location confidential until we can get legal protections in place. Of course. God, Sarah, thank you for calling. Thank you for taking care of her." Back in room 3, Elena was dealing with more than just intensifying contractions. Her body was preparing for birth, but her mind was racing with memories and fears she'd suppressed for years. "Dr. Munroe," she said during a brief respite between contractions, "what if I'm not a good mother? What if David was right about me being too selfish, too unstable?" Cara looked up from the chart she was updating. At 52, she'd heard this question from hundreds of women, but it hit differently coming from someone who'd been systematically convinced she was incapable of making good decisions. "Elena, tell me about your teaching. What made you good at that job?" The question seemed to surprise Elena. I cared about the kids. I wanted them to feel safe and valued. Some of them came from difficult homes, and I tried to make school a place where they could just be children. And how did you know when a child was troubled?" Elena's eyes grew distant as she remembered. "You learned to read the signs. A child who flinches when you move too quickly. One who's always hungry or always tired. Kids who apologize constantly, even for things that aren't their fault." She paused, realization dawning. Kids who seem to disappear a little more each day. You recognized those signs because you understood what those children were experiencing. "Yes." Elena's voice was soft. "I had a student, Tommy, whose father drank too much. Tommy would come to school with bruises he'd make excuses for, always trying to protect his dad's reputation. I knew what that felt like. From your own childhood." "No, my parents were wonderful, but from my marriage." Elena shifted position as another contraction began building. "I became an expert at making excuses for David's behavior, at protecting his reputation even when it hurt me." Dr. Munroe sat down beside Elena's bed. "Do you think Tommy was a child because his father abused him? Of course not. Tommy was sweet and brave and deserved so much better than what he was getting at home. Then why do you think you're a bad person because David abused you?" Elena stared at her for a long moment, the parallel suddenly clear. She'd spent years extending compassion to children in situations similar to her own while denying herself. "That same understanding. It's different when it's your own life," she said finally. "It's exactly the same. The only difference is perspective." Elena was quiet as she worked through the contraction, but Cara could see something shifting in her expression. The self-blame that had been etched into her features since she'd arrived was beginning to ease, replaced by something that looked like self-compassion. "Sarah went to call Maria," Elena said when the contraction passed. "How do you feel about that?" "Scared. What if she doesn't want to see me after what I said to her? What if she thinks I really meant it?" "Elena, if someone you loved called you tomorrow and told you they'd been forced to cut contact with you by an abusive partner, what would your reaction be?" Elena considered this. "I'd be relieved that they were finally safe. I'd want to help however I could." "Then trust your sister to have the same capacity for love and forgiveness that you would have." At that moment, Sarah reappeared in the doorway, smiling. "Elena, I just got off the phone with Maria. She's driving here right now. She should arrive around noon." Elena burst into tears, not the quiet, fearful crying she'd been doing all night, but deep, cathartic sobs that seemed to release years of accumulated grief and loneliness. "She's coming," Elena managed to ask between sobs. "She said to tell you that she never believed you meant those things you said, that she's been worried sick about you for months, and that she can't wait to meet her new niece or nephew." Elena pressed her hands to her face, overwhelmed by relief. For the first time in 2 years, she wouldn't be alone. Her sister, her best friend, her ally, was coming to be with her during the most important moment of her life. "There's more," Sarah continued gently. "Maria said she and her husband have a guest room that's yours for as long as you need it. Portland has excellent domestic violence resources, and she's already researching legal aid organizations." Elena looked up at both women through her tears. "I'm going to have help, real help." "Yes, you are," Dr. Munroe said, checking the monitors that showed her baby's steady heartbeat. "Your daughter is going to be born into a family that loves her, and a support system that will protect both of you." For the first time since arriving at the hospital, Elena allowed herself to imagine a future beyond just survival. A future where she could teach again, where her daughter could grow up confident and unafraid, where families, Sunday dinners and birthday parties and ordinary happiness were possible. The photo in her abandoned purse, a picture of her and Maria, from last Christmas, both of them laughing at some joke she couldn't even remember now, would soon be more than just a memento. It would be a promise of restoration, of family bonds that even David Martinez hadn't been able to destroy completely. Detective Lisa Rivera arrived at City General at 5:15 a.m., her coffee still steaming in the early morning air. 20 years with the domestic violence unit had taught her that the middle of the night often brought the most desperate cases, and sometimes the most important ones. Sarah Chen met her at the elevator, both women speaking in the low tones that hospital corridors demanded. "She's ready to talk, but she's also in active labor. The baby will probably be born within the next few hours." "How coherent is she?" "Very. Dr. Munroe says the labor is progressing normally, and Elena's been lucid and consistent throughout the night." Sarah handed Detective Rivera a file. "I've documented everything she's told us so far, and Dr. Munroe has medical records showing evidence of physical abuse." Rivera flipped through the initial report, her expression growing grimmer with each page. David Martinez's name was familiar to her, not from her own cases, but from the society pages of the local newspaper. Prominent businessman, hospital board member, regular at charity galas. Has he been back since earlier tonight? "No, but he's called repeatedly. Hospital security has his description and instructions to contact me immediately if he shows up." Detective Rivera nodded, tucking the file under her arm. She'd handled dozens of cases like this over the years, but something about the timing, a woman fleeing during active labor, spoke to a desperation that went beyond typical domestic violence situations. In room 3, Elena was propped up in bed, her contractions now coming every 3 minutes with an intensity that left her breathless between waves. Despite the physical discomfort, her eyes were alert and focused when Detective Rivera introduced herself. "Elena, I'm Detective Rivera from the Domestic Violence Unit. Sarah tells me you're ready to make an official statement." "I am." Elena's voice was steady, though she had to pause mid-sentence as another contraction built. When it passed, she continued, "I want everything documented officially. Even if nothing comes of it legally, I want it on record." Rivera settled into the chair beside Elena's bed, pulling out a small recording device. "With your permission, I'd like to record our conversation. It ensures accuracy and can be used as evidence later if needed." Elena nodded, then looked directly into the detective's eyes. "Detective, I need you to understand something before we start. My husband isn't just some random abuser. He's David Martinez. He knows judges, prosecutors, half the city council. He's donated thousands of dollars to police charities over the years." "I'm aware of who your husband is," Rivera said calmly. And I want you to know that his social connections won't influence how I handle this case. The law applies to everyone equally." Elena's laugh was bitter. "Does it, though? Last year when I tried to talk to my doctor about some bruises, David convinced him I was having mental health issues related to pregnancy hormones. 2 weeks later, I was seeing a psychiatrist who prescribed antidepressants and suggested I was catastrophizing normal marital disagreements." Rivera made a note. "Do you still have records from those medical appointments?" "David kept all my medical records. Said it was easier for him to manage my healthcare since I was too emotional to communicate effectively with doctors." Elena shifted position, trying to find comfort as her body prepared for birth. "Everything was in his name: insurance, bank accounts, even my cell phone plan. I couldn't make a medical appointment without his approval." "That's financial abuse," Rivera said. "Even in marriages, individuals have the right to financial autonomy and medical privacy." Elena looked surprised. "I thought that was just normal. He always said marriages worked better when one person handled all the practical matters." Dr. Munroe appeared in the doorway, checking on Elena's progress. The detective paused the recording, while medical needs were addressed, then resumed once they were alone again. "Elena, I'd like you to tell me about the incident that made you decide to leave." Elena's hands moved protectively over her belly as she remembered. "We were arguing about the baby. David never wanted children, said they were too expensive, too disruptive to our lifestyle. He'd been pressuring me for months to consider adoption. Pressuring how? Bringing home brochures about adoption agencies, scheduling meetings with adoption counselors without telling me, telling people at social events that we were exploring options for the baby." Elena's voice grew stronger as she spoke. "When I finally told him I wasn't giving up my child, he became furious. What happened next? He shoved me against the kitchen counter, hard. I felt the baby shift inside me in a way that didn't feel normal, like something might be wrong." Elena's breathing became rapid as she relived the moment. "I was terrified that he'd hurt the baby. Had he been physical with you before?" Elena nodded. "Never anything that would show in public. Grabbing my arms hard enough to leave bruises, pushing me during arguments, pinching me under the table at restaurants when I said something he didn't like." Rivera continued taking notes, recognizing the pattern of an abuser who was careful about maintaining his public image while escalating his private violence. "After he pushed you, what did you do?" "I pretended everything was fine, made dinner, acted normal, but I was planning." Elena's eyes grew distant. "I waited until he fell asleep around 2 a.m., then I took my car keys and left. I didn't pack anything. I was afraid if I took too long, he'd wake up." "Where did you go first?" "I just drove. I didn't know where to go. I couldn't go to Maria. He knows where she lives. I couldn't go to friends because they all think David is wonderful." Elena paused. As another contraction hit, I realized I didn't have a single relationship that David hadn't somehow influenced or controlled. Detective Rivera had heard variations of this story too many times, but it never got easier. The systematic isolation, the careful cultivation of a public image that made victims feel like no one would believe them. It was textbook psychological abuse. "Elena, you mentioned that David had documentation suggesting you were mentally unstable. Can you tell me more about that?" "He started keeping a journal about 2 years ago. He called it Tracking My Episodes." Elena's voice was filled with self-doubt even as she spoke. "Any time I got upset about his behavior, any time I questioned his decisions, any time I wanted to do something he didn't approve of, he'd write it down as evidence of my instability." "Did you ever see what he wrote?" "Once. He left it open on his desk, and I think he wanted me to see it. It described me as increasingly paranoid, unable to accept responsibility for her actions, and showing signs of postpartum depression despite not having given birth yet." Rivera felt her jaw clench. This level of premeditation, documenting, manufactured evidence of mental instability, spoke to an abuser who was not only violent but calculating in his efforts to destroy his victim's credibility. Elena, I want you to know that what you've described is a recognized pattern of behavior. You're not crazy, you're not overreacting, and you're not responsible for David's choices. Elena looked up at her with tears in her eyes. Sometimes I wonder if he was right, if I really am unstable, if running away just proves his point. Let me ask you something, Rivera said gently. If one of your former students came to you and described being treated the way David treated you, what would you tell that child? Elena was quiet for a moment, considering. I'd tell them it wasn't their fault, that no one deserves to be hurt or controlled by someone who's supposed to love them. Then extend yourself the same compassion you'd give a child in need. At that moment, Elena's business card from David's real estate company, found in her purse by the security staff, felt like evidence of a life she was finally ready to leave behind. The card represented his public persona, successful, respectable, trustworthy. But Elena was finally ready to tell the truth about the private man behind the public facade, the man whose charm and social connections had protected him while he systematically destroyed the woman he'd promised to love and cherish. Detective Rivera, Elena said, as another contraction subsided, I'm ready to tell you everything, every incident, every threat, every way he made me feel like I was disappearing. I want it all on record. Rivera smiled and resumed the recording. Take your time. We have all day. Detective Rivera was halfway through Elena's statement when her phone buzzed with a text message. She glanced at it discreetly, then did a double take that made Elena pause mid-sentence. Is everything okay? Elena asked, noticing the detective's expression. Rivera looked at her phone again, then at Elena. I need to make a quick call. I'll be right back. She stepped into the hallway, her mind racing. The text was from her partner, Detective Marcus Webb. Check your email. Found something big on the Martinez case. Rivera pulled up her email on her phone, scanning quickly through Webb's message and the attached police reports. What she read made her heart rate accelerate, and her opinion of David Martinez shift from disgust to something approaching horror. She returned to Elena's room with a poker face that had taken 20 years to perfect. But internally, she was recalibrating everything about this case. Elena, she said carefully, I need to ask you something important. In all the time you were married to David, did you ever suspect he might have been involved with other women? Elena looked confused by the question. Other women? No, David was almost obsessively devoted to maintaining our marriage's public image. He was always talking about how divorce was for weak people who couldn't make commitments work. What about before you were married? Did you know anything about his previous relationships? Not much. He said he'd dated casually but never found anyone worth settling down with until he met me. Elena shifted uncomfortably as another contraction began. Why are you asking? Rivera made a decision that would fundamentally change how this case proceeded. Elena, I just received some information that puts your situation in a much larger context. You're not David's first victim. What do you mean? Over the past 5 years, 3 other women have filed police reports involving David Martinez, 2 restraining orders that were later dropped, and 1 domestic violence complaint that was dismissed when the victim recanted her statement. Elena stared at her, processing this information. Other women reported him for abuse. More than that, I just got details on the most recent case from 18 months ago. A woman named Jennifer Chen, no relation to Sarah, was married to David from 2018 to 2019. Married. Elena's voice was barely a whisper. But David and I were married in 2020. He told me he'd never been married before. The implications hit Elena like a physical blow. Not only had David lied about his past, but she wasn't his first victim. She was part of a pattern. Elena, I need to ask you some specific questions now, and I want you to think carefully about your answers. Did David ever try to convince you that you had mental health problems? Yes, constantly, especially in the last 2 years. Did he control your access to medical care? He insisted on being present for all my appointments, said it was because he cared about my health. Did he ever suggest that you might be better off in a residential treatment facility? Elena's eyes widened. How did you? Yes, about 6 months ago he brought home brochures for a private psychiatric facility. Said maybe I needed more intensive help than outpatient therapy could provide. Rivera felt pieces clicking into place with sickening clarity. Elena, Jennifer Chen spent 4 months in a private psychiatric facility in 2019. She was committed by her husband, David, who convinced doctors that she was a danger to herself. Oh my God. It gets worse. Jennifer disappeared from that facility. Officially, she signed herself out against medical advice and has never been heard from since. But Elena, there's no record of Jennifer Chen existing anywhere after she left. That facility. No employment records, no address changes, no contact with family. Elena was staring at Rivera in horror, her hands protectively covering her belly. Are you saying, David? I'm saying that based on what I'm learning about David's pattern of behavior, your decision to run may have saved your life. And your baby's life. The room was quiet, except for the steady beep of medical monitors. Elena was processing the revelation that she hadn't just escaped an abusive marriage. She'd escaped something potentially much more sinister. The other women who filed reports, Elena said slowly. What happened to them? One moved out of state immediately, after dropping her restraining order petition. The other, Rivera paused, checking her notes. Lisa Kowalski. She was found dead in her apartment 6 months after filing a domestic violence complaint against David. Official cause of death was suicide by drug overdose. Elena felt nauseated, and not from labor pains. But you don't think it was suicide? Lisa had no history of drug use and no access to the prescription medications found in her system. But David had connections to several doctors who prescribed those same medications. Elena was quiet for several minutes, absorbing the full scope of what she'd unknowingly escaped. Her contractions continued their relentless rhythm, but now they seemed less like pain and more like her body's urgent insistence on bringing her baby into a world where they could both be safe. Detective Rivera, there's something else. Something I didn't mention before because I thought it was just David being controlling. What is it? About a month ago, David started asking questions about my medical history, my family's medical history. He seemed particularly interested in any history of mental illness or depression. Elena's voice grew thoughtful. And he'd been researching different psychiatric facilities, claiming it was for a charity project he was working on. Rivera made notes rapidly. Elena, I think David was planning to have you committed, just like he did with Jennifer Chen. Your pregnancy complicated things because it would be harder to convince doctors that a pregnant woman was mentally unstable, enough to require institutionalization. So when I told him I wouldn't give up the baby for adoption, he escalated to physical violence because his original plan wasn't working. Rivera leaned forward. Elena, when you felt the baby shift wrong after he pushed you, you may have saved both your lives by running that night. Elena was crying now, but not from fear. The tears were relief, validation, and grief for the women who hadn't been as fortunate as she was. What happens now? Elena asked. Now we build a case, not just for domestic violence, but for investigation into the deaths of Lisa Kowalski and the disappearance of Jennifer Chen. Your testimony, combined with the medical evidence Dr. Munroe has documented and the pattern established by previous victims, gives us grounds for a much more serious investigation. Will he be arrested? Based on what you've told me and the evidence we're gathering, yes, probably within the next 24 hours. Rivera's phone buzzed again. Elena, my partner is outside with additional officers. We're going to need you to stay here under police protection until David is in custody. Elena nodded, feeling simultaneously terrified and empowered. She was no longer just a woman fleeing an abusive husband. She was potentially the key witness who could prevent other women from becoming victims of what appeared to be a calculating predator. There's one more thing. Rivera said gently. We're going to need to examine the psychiatric records from your recent appointments, the ones where David convinced doctors you were unstable. If he was building a case for involuntary commitment, those records will be crucial evidence. Elena thought about the file folder David kept in his home office, the one filled with what he called documentation of her episodes. Now she understood what those documents really were. Not evidence of her mental instability, but preparation for her elimination. Detective, when you arrest David, will you search our house? Yes, why? He keeps files on me. Documentation of everything he claimed was evidence of my mental problems. But now I think... Elena paused as another contraction hit. When it passed, she continued, I think you might find files on other women too. Jennifer, Lisa, maybe others we don't know about yet. Rivera's expression was grim. Elena, what you've done tonight, leaving when you did, coming here, agreeing to testify, you may have just exposed a serial predator who's been using his social connections and reputation to hunt vulnerable women. Elena looked down at her belly, where her daughter was preparing to be born into a world that was suddenly much safer than it had been 12 hours ago. The police evidence file that would soon document David's crimes would represent justice not just for Elena, but for women whose voices had been silenced by a man who had perfected the art of destroying his victims while maintaining the perfect public facade. My daughter, Elena said softly, she'll never have to be afraid of him. No, Rivera agreed, she won't. At 7:30 a.m., Elena's contractions were coming every 2 minutes with an intensity that left no doubt. Her baby was ready to be born. But as her body prepared for delivery, the world outside room 3 was mobilizing for something much larger than a simple birth. Detective Rivera stepped into the hallway to coordinate with her partner, Detective Webb, who had arrived with 2 additional officers and a search warrant for the Martinez residence. Their conversation was conducted in the low, urgent tones of law enforcement officers who knew they were racing against time. David Martinez hasn't been home since last night, Webb reported. Neighbors say his car left around 11 p.m. and hasn't returned. His office says he called in sick today. He's running, Rivera said grimly. The question is how far he'll get before we find him. Meanwhile, Dr. Munroe was focused entirely on Elena's medical needs. At 52, she'd delivered thousands of babies, but rarely under circumstances where the mother's safety depended on law enforcement protection. The irony wasn't lost on her. Elena had fled her home, seeking safety for her child, and now both, mother and baby, were literally surrounded by people whose job was to protect them. Elena, your cervix is dilated to 8 centimeters. Dr. Munroe said, after completing another examination. Your baby will be born within the next few hours. Elena nodded, though her attention was divided between the physical demands of labor and the emotional weight of what Detective Rivera had revealed about David's other victims. Between contractions, she found herself thinking about Jennifer Chen, wondering if Jennifer had felt the same desperation Elena had experienced, if she'd also tried to run before it was too late. Dr. Munroe, Elena said during a brief respite, the detective told me about David's previous victims. Did you know about any of this when you first examined me? Cara paused in checking the fetal monitor. I knew something was seriously wrong. Beyond typical domestic violence, the level of systematic control, the way you'd been convinced you were mentally unstable, that spoke to someone with experience manipulating victims and medical professionals. But you didn't know he might be... Elena couldn't finish the sentence. A killer, no. But Elena, predators like David often escalate over time. What starts as emotional abuse progresses to physical violence, then to more extreme measures when their control is threatened. Elena was quiet, processing this. Her teaching certificate, discovered in her abandoned purse by hospital security, lay on the bedside table, a reminder of who she'd been before David began systematically erasing her identity. She'd been someone who protected vulnerable children, who recognized the signs of abuse and neglect. The bitter irony was that she'd been so good at identifying those signs in others while missing them in her own life. I used to tell my students that brave people aren't people who aren't scared, Elena said suddenly. Brave people are people who are scared but do the right thing anyway. Dr. Munroe smiled. Sounds like something a very wise teacher would say. I just never thought I'd need to take my own advice. At that moment, Sarah Chen appeared in the doorway with news that would change everything about Elena's immediate future. Elena, I just got off the phone with Maria. She's about an hour away, but there's something else. What is it? Maria contacted a domestic violence advocacy organization in Portland before she left. They've arranged emergency housing for you and the baby, legal representation, and financial assistance to help you get back on your feet. Elena felt tears welling up again, but these were tears of relief and gratitude. I'm really going to be free of him. Yes, you are. And Elena, there's more. The organization in Portland has been tracking cases similar to yours across several states. They think David's pattern of behavior may extend beyond just the victims Detective Rivera mentioned. This news hit Elena like another contraction. You mean there might be other women? It's possible. Your case might be the key to uncovering a much larger pattern of predatory behavior. Elena's labor intensified, as if her body was responding to the urgency of the situation unfolding around her. Each contraction brought her daughter closer to being born, but it also brought the final confrontation with David closer to reality. Sarah, Elena said between contractions, I need to write something, a letter to my daughter, in case something happens to me. Nothing is going to happen to you, Dr. Munroe said firmly. You're surrounded by people whose job is to keep you safe. But I need her to know, Elena insisted. I need her to know why I made the choices I made, why I ran, why I brought her into the world under these circumstances. Sarah found paper and a pen, helping Elena sit up enough to write, despite the intensifying contractions. Elena's handwriting was shaky, interrupted frequently by waves of pain, but her words were clear and purposeful. My dearest daughter, by the time you read this, you'll be old enough to understand why Mommy had to be brave when you were born. I want you to know that every decision I made was to protect you and give you a life free from fear. Your daddy wasn't a safe person, but that has nothing to do with how much I wanted you and loved you from the moment I knew you existed. You were my reason for finding courage I didn't know I had. Always remember that you were born from love, not fear, and that your life represents hope and second chances for both of us. I hope I get to watch you grow up to be strong and confident and unafraid. But if something happens to me, know that Aunt Maria will love you just as much as I do, and that you are surrounded by people who will protect you. You are my miracle, my hope, my reason for being brave. I love you more than words can express. Mommy. Elena folded the letter carefully and handed it to Sarah. Give this to Maria if... I'll give it to Maria so she can save it for your daughter to read when she's older, Sarah corrected gently. You're going to be fine, Elena. Outside the hospital room, Detective Rivera received a call that made her pulse quicken. David Martinez had been spotted at a gas station 30 miles outside the city, heading toward the interstate. Police units were en route to intercept him, but Rivera knew that cornering a desperate man could be dangerous, especially one who had potentially killed before. Elena, Rivera said, returning to the room, we've located David. He's trying to leave the state, which means he knows we're onto him. You and your baby are safe here, but I want you to know that we're about to arrest him. Elena nodded, gripping Dr. Munroe's hand as another contraction peaked. When it passed, she looked directly at Detective Rivera. What will happen to him? If we can prove what we suspect about his other victims, he'll spend the rest of his life in prison. Elena thought about Jennifer Chen, about Lisa Kowalski, about women whose names she might never know, who had crossed paths with David Martinez and paid the ultimate price. Her daughter's birth would mark not just the beginning of a new life, but potentially the end of David's ability to destroy other lives. "Detective Rivera," Elena said, her voice growing stronger despite her physical exhaustion, "when you arrest him, I want you to know that every woman who was hurt by David matters. Jennifer, Lisa, whoever else there might be, they deserve justice too. They'll get it," Rivera promised. "Your courage in coming forward is going to make sure of that." Another contraction hit, this one stronger than any previous one, and Dr. Munroe quickly checked Elena's progress. "Elena, you're fully dilated. It's time to push." As Elena prepared for the final stage of labor, surrounded by people who had become her protectors and advocates, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years: complete trust in the people around her. Her daughter was about to be born into a world where the truth had finally been told, where justice was being served, and where a support system was already in place to ensure both mother and child would be safe. The teaching certificate on her bedside table caught her eye one more time, and Elena realized that she'd just taught the most important lesson of her career, that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is ask for help, tell the truth, and trust others to protect what matters most. Her daughter was ready to be born. David was about to be arrested, and Elena Martinez was about to become the woman she'd always been meant to be: strong, independent, and unafraid. "Push, Elena. Your baby is coming." Dr. Munroe's voice was calm and encouraging, but Elena could hear the urgency underneath. After hours of labor, her body was finally ready to bring her daughter into the world, and not a moment too soon. Outside the delivery room, Detective Rivera's radio crackled with updates from the field units pursuing David Martinez. "Suspect vehicle spotted on Highway 84 eastbound. Units in pursuit." Elena pushed with everything she had, channeling months of fear and pain into this one moment of bringing life into the world. Between contractions, she could hear fragments of radio communication from the hallway. Suspect attempting to evade, requesting backup units, and she realized that her daughter's birth and David's capture were happening simultaneously. "I can see the baby's head," Dr. Munroe announced. "One more big push, Elena." Elena gripped the bed rails and pushed with a strength she didn't know she possessed. The pain was overwhelming, but underneath it was something else: determination, hope, and the fierce protective instincts of a mother who had already sacrificed everything for her child's safety. "The head is out. Elena, you're doing beautifully. One more push for the shoulders." As Elena prepared for the final push, Detective Rivera's radio delivered news that made her step quickly into the hallway. "Suspect vehicle crashed during pursuit. Suspect in custody. Repeat, David Martinez is in custody." Elena didn't hear the radio update because she was focused entirely on the miracle happening in her own body. With a final powerful push, she felt her daughter slip into the world, followed immediately by Dr. Munroe's joyful announcement: "It's a girl." "Elena, you have a beautiful, healthy daughter." The baby's first cry filled the room, strong, indignant, and absolutely perfect. Elena collapsed back against the pillows, tears streaming down her face as Dr. Munroe placed the tiny, squirming infant on her chest. "She's perfect," Elena whispered, her hands trembling as she touched her daughter's face for the first time. The baby was red and wrinkled and covered in vernix, but to Elena, she was the most beautiful thing she'd ever seen. 10 fingers, 10 and toes, and a very healthy set of lungs, Dr. Munroe said with a smile, quickly checking the baby's airways and breathing. "She's absolutely perfect." Elena looked down at her daughter, this tiny person she'd protected through months of fear and uncertainty, who had been her motivation for finding courage she didn't know she possessed. The baby's eyes were open, dark and alert, seeming to focus on Elena's face with the mysterious awareness that newborns sometimes displayed. "Hello, sweetheart," Elena whispered. "I'm your mama. I'm so glad you're finally here." The baby settled against Elena's chest, her crying subsiding into soft whimpers as she adjusted to the world outside the womb. Elena felt a rush of protective love so intense it almost overwhelmed her. This was what she'd been fighting for, this moment of holding her child safely in her arms. "Elena," Dr. Munroe said gently, "what would you like to name her?" Elena had been thinking about this for months, but the name that came to her now felt absolutely right. Hope. Her name is Hope Elena Martinez. Hope, Dr. Munroe repeated approvingly. "That's perfect." As if responding to her name, baby Hope made a small sound and nestled closer to Elena's chest. Elena marveled at how perfectly her daughter fit against her body, how natural it felt to hold this tiny person she'd been carrying for 9 months. Detective Rivera appeared in the doorway, her expression a mixture of professional satisfaction and genuine happiness. "Elena, I have news. David has been arrested. He crashed his car trying to evade police and is now in custody on multiple charges." Elena looked up from her daughter, feeling a weight lift from her shoulders that she'd been carrying for years. "It's over?" "The immediate threat is over, yes. There will be legal proceedings ahead, but Elena, you and Hope are safe now." Elena held her daughter closer, feeling the baby's steady breathing against her chest. Hope was born free. Free from David's violence, free from the cycle of abuse that might have destroyed both their lives, free to grow up confident and unafraid. "Dr. Munroe," Elena said, "thank you for everything. For believing me, for protecting us, for helping me find my voice again." "Elena, you found your own voice. You made the choice to run, to seek help, to trust people who wanted to protect you. That courage came from inside you." Elena looked down at Hope, who had fallen asleep against her chest, tiny fists curled up under her chin. This perfect, innocent child would never know the fear that had dominated Elena's life for years. She would grow up knowing that her mother had been brave enough to choose safety over familiarity, truth over lies. "She's going to have such a different life than I did," Elena said softly. "She's going to have the life you chose for her," Dr. Munroe corrected. "The life you fought for." The baby's hospital identification bracelet, Hope Elena Martinez, born at 9:47 a.m., represented more than just a new birth. It represented a new beginning, a fresh start, and the end of David Martinez's reign of terror in Elena's life. Hope was here. David was in custody, and Elena Martinez was finally, truly free. Hope Elena Martinez entered the world at 9:47 a.m. on October 15th, weighing 6 pounds 3 ounces. Her first official document, the birth certificate that Nurse Patricia was carefully preparing, would list Elena Martinez as the mother and would notably leave the father's section blank per Elena's specific request. "I don't want his name anywhere on her documents," Elena had told Dr. Munroe while Hope nursed for the first time. "This is her fresh start. She doesn't need to carry his legacy." The baby latched on naturally, her tiny hand gripping Elena's finger with surprising strength. Elena marveled at how perfectly Hope fit in her arms, how right it felt to hold this small person she'd protected through months of fear and uncertainty. "She knows you," Dr. Munroe observed, watching the peaceful way Hope settled against Elena's chest. "Babies recognize their mother's voice and heartbeat from the womb. She's been listening to you talk to her for months." Elena thought about all the conversations she'd had with her unborn daughter during those long, lonely months, whispered promises in the middle of the night, silent vows during David's verbal tirades, desperate prayers for both their safety. And during the worst moments of abuse, "I used to tell her we were going to be okay," Elena said softly. "Even when I didn't believe it myself, I kept telling her that somehow we'd find a way to be safe." Detective Rivera knocked gently on the door, then entered with an update that would fundamentally change Elena's understanding of what she'd escaped. "Elena, I wanted to give you the latest information about David's arrest." Elena looked up from Hope, who had fallen asleep while nursing. "Is he definitely in custody?" "He's been booked on multiple charges: domestic violence, assault, stalking, and violation of privacy laws related to monitoring your communications." "But Elena, there's more." Rivera settled into the chair beside Elena's bed, her expression serious, but hopeful. When we searched your house, we found David's home office. He kept detailed files on multiple women, including you. Files? Documentation of what he called behavioral patterns, medical records he'd obtained illegally, psychological evaluations he'd commissioned, and correspondence with private psychiatric facilities. Rivera paused, choosing her words carefully. Elena, we also found evidence linking him to the deaths of Lisa Kowalski and the disappearance of Jennifer Chen. Elena felt her heart skip, even as she automatically adjusted Hope's position for comfort. Evidence, financial records showing payments to the doctor who prescribed Lisa's medication, correspondence with the psychiatric facility where Jennifer was held, and, this is the most damning, detailed plans for having you committed to the same facility where Jennifer disappeared. Elena stared at Rivera, the full scope of David's intentions finally clear. He was going to have me committed, and then, we believe he planned to have you declared incompetent, gain legal control of your assets and any children, and then arrange for your disappearance while you were institutionalized. Elena held Hope closer, overwhelmed by the realization that her decision to run had literally saved both their lives. My baby would likely have been put up for adoption through agencies David had connections with. He had preliminary paperwork already prepared. The calculated nature of David's plan was breathtaking in its cruelty. Elena thought about the adoption brochures he'd brought home, the pressure to consider their options, the systematic way he'd documented her supposed mental instability. Detective Rivera, what happens now? Now we build the strongest case possible. Your testimony, combined with the physical evidence we've found and the testimony from David's previous victims who are finally willing to come forward, should be enough for multiple convictions. Elena felt something settle in her chest, not just relief, but a sense of justice for all the women David had hurt. Other victims are coming forward. 3 more women have contacted us since news of David's arrest broke this morning. Women who were afraid to speak up before because of his reputation and connections, but who feel safe coming forward now that there's an official investigation. Hope stirred in Elena's arms, making soft baby sounds as she woke up. Elena looked down at her daughter's perfect face and felt a fierce surge of protectiveness and pride. Hope would grow up knowing that her mother had been brave enough to save them both. Elena, Rivera continued, I want you to know that what you did, running when you did, coming here, agreeing to testify, you've potentially saved other women's lives. David won't be able to hurt anyone else. Elena kissed Hope's forehead, breathing in that distinctive newborn scent that every mother recognized. She'll never have to be afraid of him. No, she won't, and neither will you. At that moment, Sarah Chen appeared in the doorway with someone Elena had been desperately hoping to see. Maria, Elena's sister, looking tired from the long drive, but radiant with joy and relief. Elena, Maria said, tears streaming down her face as she approached the bed. Oh my God, Elena, I'm so proud of you. The sisters embraced carefully, with Hope nestled between them, and Elena felt the last piece of her support system click into place. She had her daughter, she had her sister, she had people who believed in her and would protect them both. Hope Elena Martinez slept peacefully in her mother's arms, unaware that her birth marked the end of one story and the beginning of another, a story where love would triumph over fear, where truth would overcome lies, and where a brave mother's choice would ensure her daughter grew up free. 3 months later, Elena Martinez stood in front of her new 3rd-grade classroom in Portland, Oregon, watching 26 eager faces look up at her expectantly. Sunlight streamed through large windows, illuminating colorful posters about kindness and courage that she'd hung carefully on the walls during her first week back to teaching. Good morning, class, she said with a confidence that still surprised her sometimes. Today, we're going to talk about what makes people brave. In the corner of the classroom, a small photo sat on her desk. Hope, sleeping peacefully in Maria's arms, taken just last week. Elena glanced at it and smiled, then turned her attention back to her students. Who can tell me about a time when they had to be brave? Hands shot up across the room, and Elena called on Tommy, a quiet boy who reminded her of her students back in her old life. I was brave when I told my mom that my dad drinks too much, and it scares me. Elena's heart clenched with familiar recognition, but her voice remained steady and encouraging. That was very brave, Tommy. It takes courage to ask for help when something scary is happening. After school, Elena drove to the small apartment she shared with Maria, just 15 minutes from the school. It was nothing like the large house she'd lived in with David. The furniture was second-hand, the kitchen tiny, the bedroom small, but every corner of it was filled with laughter, safety, and the kind of peace Elena had forgotten was possible. "How was your first week back?" Maria asked, bouncing Hope gently while preparing bottles for the evening feeding routine they'd perfected over the past 3 months. "Wonderful," Elena said, taking her daughter and settling into the rocking chair that had been Maria's welcome home. "Gift. I'd forgotten how much I loved teaching, how much I missed having my own classroom, my own students to protect and encourage." Hope, now 3 months old and thriving, looked up at Elena with the alert curiosity that had become her trademark. She was a content baby, sleeping well and growing steadily, as if she somehow understood that she was safe and loved. "Any word on the trial?" Maria asked carefully. "Detective Rivera called yesterday. David's pleading guilty to avoid a lengthy trial. He'll get 25 to life without parole." Elena's voice was matter-of-fact, but Maria could see the relief in her eyes. "It's over, Maria. Really, truly over." The legal proceedings had moved faster than anyone expected, partly because David's own meticulous record-keeping had provided prosecutors with overwhelming evidence of his crimes. The files found in his home office detailed not just his abuse of Elena, but his systematic stalking and murder of other women spanning over a decade, and the other victims' families. They're finally getting closure. Jennifer Chen's family is planning a memorial service now that they know what really happened to her. Lisa Kowalski's mother came to Portland last month to thank me personally for coming forward. Elena looked down at Hope, who had fallen asleep during her bottle. Every day, she marveled at how different their lives were now. Hope would grow up knowing she was wanted, loved, and safe. She would never see her mother flinch at loud voices or make excuses for someone else's cruelty. "Dr. Munroe called this morning," Elena said, carefully moving Hope to her shoulder for burping. "She's coming to visit next month. Says she wants to meet Hope when she's not in the middle of a medical emergency." "How is she doing?" "Good. She decided not to retire after all. Says helping us reminded her why she became a doctor in the first place." Elena smiled. "She's also started volunteering with a domestic violence organization, helping train other medical professionals to recognize signs of abuse." That evening, after Maria had gone to bed and Hope was sleeping peacefully in her crib, Elena sat at her small desk, writing in the journal Sarah Chen had suggested she keep. The therapeutic writing had become a nightly ritual, a way of processing her journey from victim to survivor to advocate. "Today marks 3 months since the night I ran," she wrote. 3 months since I found the courage to choose Hope's safety over my own fear. Some days I still can't believe how different our lives are now." She paused, listening to the ordinary sounds of their safe life. Maria's television in the next room, Hope's gentle breathing through the baby monitor, the distant sound of neighbors talking on their front porch. These simple, peaceful sounds had once seemed impossible. Elena had started a support group for domestic violence survivors, meeting twice a week at the community center near her school. She used the same teaching skills that had made her effective, with children to help other women find their voices and rebuild their confidence. "I told my students today that brave people aren't people who aren't scared," she continued writing. Brave people are people who are scared, but do the right thing anyway. I think I'm finally learning to take my own advice. On the wall above her desk hung 2 items that represented the journey from her old life to her new one. The first was Hope's hospital bracelet from the night she was born, a symbol of new beginnings and the courage to trust others with their safety. The second was a set of keys to their apartment, representing independence, choice, and the freedom to build. A life defined by love rather than fear. Elena finished her journal entry and walked quietly into Hope's room. Her daughter slept peacefully in the crib Maria had assembled during Elena's first week of recovery, surrounded by stuffed animals and blankets given by the domestic violence organization and new friends from Elena's school. "We made it, sweetheart," Elena whispered, gently touching Hope's tiny hand. "We're safe, we're loved, and you're going to grow up knowing that your mama was brave enough to choose a better life for both of us." Outside, Portland's lights twinkled in the distance, and Elena felt something she'd almost forgotten was possible. Genuine happiness, unmarked by fear or the need to constantly anticipate someone else's moods. Tomorrow, she would teach her students about courage. Hope would continue growing strong and healthy, and Elena would continue building the independent, peaceful life she'd thought was impossible just a few months ago. The woman who had once fled. Her home in active labor, carrying nothing but hope and determination, had become exactly who she was meant to be, a mother, a teacher, a survivor, and an advocate for others who needed to remember that escape was possible and that help was always available for those brave enough to ask for it.